So while my slides are loading, I'll just give a little bit of a brief background about myself. So I've been at FDA roughly 5 years. I was with FDA's Office of Legislation, so just prior to when the last round of UPAs were enacted. I recently have joined the Office of Policy for Pharmaceutical Quality, and I hope to be able to earn the kinds of praise that my communications colleague Jordana earned earlier today. So you already heard a fair amount about OPQ's activities and accomplishments during the progress update. I just want to highlight a few policy-related topics, specifically GDUFA 2 commitments that are focused on pharmaceutical quality, a few key select policy initiatives and collaborations, as well as best practices that firms can implement, which can help reduce quality issues during ANDA reviews. Excuse me. So you've already heard a fair amount about pre-submission facility correspondence, so I'm not going to spend too much time on this. As Ted and Cook have mentioned, it impacts the review performance goals for priority original ANDAs, as well as priority major ANDA amendments and priority prior approval supplements where pre-approval inspections are required. This information has to be submitted 2 months in advance, and because it impacts FDA's facility assessment, it's also very important that this information is complete, accurate, and remains unchanged. So in particular, the information that has to be in the pre-submission facility correspondence, this comes straight out of the commitment letter, so if you haven't read it yet, this is a little bit of a cheat sheet. But the elements that have to be included are the facility name, facility contact name, FEI, DUNS numbers, the facility address, operations performed, and a description of the manufacturing process, a certification that for any type 2 DMFs, they similarly have complete and accurate facility information, as well as a confirmation that the facilities are ready for inspection. So throughout the day, we've talked a little bit about planning inspections, as well as clear expectations and consistency for inspections. And GDUFA 2 also has elements related to the communication regarding inspections. So specifically, by May 31st, 2018, when FDA conducts an application-related inspection for a facility named in an ANDA, prior approval supplement, or type 2 DMF, if there are outstanding issues that could potentially prevent approval, FDA will notify applicants through an information request, a discipline review letter, or complete response letter. Furthermore, by October 1st, 2018, FDA will notify owners of facilities within 90 days of the end of an inspection if there is a final inspection classification that does not negatively impact approvability. So earlier you heard a little bit about some of OPQ's surveillance activities, and GDUFA 2 also includes a requirement for a guidance on the site selection model that we use for surveillance inspections. So specifically, the guidance will outline the risk factors that we use in that model and how those risk factors are used to identify establishments that may be up for a surveillance inspection in a given year. Another guidance that is part of the GDUFA 2 commitments concerns post-approval changes to type 2 DMFs. The relevant deadline for this guidance is October 1st, 2018. And in that guidance, FDA will include submission mechanisms for ANDA applicants who reference type 2 DMFs. So the last element of GDUFA 2 that I'm going to talk about concerns improvements to our inactive ingredients database. So by October 1st, 2020, FDA will enhance the database to make it easier for users to electronically query for values on maximum daily intake and maximum daily exposure. In addition to that, FDA will commit to making updates on an ongoing basis and to provide quarterly notices of the updates that are made. And on that note, we welcome your feedback. So if there are items in the database that you notice that you think need to be corrected or updated, please let us know. You can contact us at the email address on the slide, iadupdate@fda.hhs.gov. So moving on, Dr. Kopcha already talked about a number of our policy initiatives and collaborations, but there are a few others that I wanted to highlight in a little bit more detail. So specifically, starting with the mutual recognition agreement, this was recently signed this year between the United States and the EU. And what it does is it allows FDA to rely on inspection results from EU member states once we've conducted a capability assessment for those member states. So even though the agreement is between the FDA and the EU as a whole, the capability assessments are conducted individually for each country. I'll talk a little bit more about what exactly goes into those capability assessments in a minute, but one of the important things to note is this is another opportunity for FDA to learn from our colleagues around the world, including the best practices and how they go about conducting their inspections. In terms of the benefits of the mutual recognition agreement, it avoids duplication of inspections. So from a facility perspective, there's a benefit in terms of reduced burden on facilities for firms that are located in EU member states that have been found capable. And from the FDA and EU perspective, by eliminating duplicative inspections, we're able to free up resources which could be reallocated for inspections of drug manufacturing facilities in areas that may be of greater risk. So as I mentioned, FDA is conducting member state capability assessments for each of the EU countries. So in terms of what goes into that capability assessment, in order to be found capable, a member state has to have a legal and regulatory authority to conduct inspections against a good manufacturing practices standard. They have to manage conflicts of interest in an ethical manner. They have to be able to evaluate risk and mitigate them. They have to demonstrate that they maintain appropriate oversight of manufacturing facilities within their territory. They have to receive adequate resources and appropriately use them. They also have to employ trained and qualified inspectors that have the skills and knowledge to identify manufacturing practices that could potentially harm the public health. And accordingly, they also have to have the tools necessary to take action in those instances where public health could be harmed due to poor quality drugs or products. Importantly, from the industry perspective, one thing to note is that while member states have to meet these requirements, they are not required to have identical procedures to FDA's inspection procedures. In terms of some of our other international activities, Dr. Kopcha mentioned a number of organizations that we have been working with. There are a few items here that I wanted to highlight. Specifically, in terms of our work with the International Council on Harmonization, there are a few guidelines here. Q12, this one builds on some of the principles from Q8 through Q11 concerning management of post-approval CMC changes across the pharmaceutical product lifecycle. So trying to shift away from just focusing on the early stage and really focus on the whole lifecycle. In addition, we're also working on M9, which is a biopharmaceutics classification system based biowaivers, and M10 on bioanalytical method validation. And these we're working to harmonize different data requirements and method validation. In addition, we also work with the Pharmaceutical Inspectorate Cooperation Scheme. So we work on their expert circles to develop aid memoirs and deliver training. As has previously been mentioned, we work with a number of different organizations, including international consensus standard development organizations such as ISO. And as it's also been mentioned, we're not just an isolated silo. We work with colleagues across the agency, and so OPQ works on outreach and training, which we deliver in coordination with our foreign offices. In the progress update, you already heard a little bit about the guidances that we issued in 2016. I wanted to take a quick note to give you an idea of some of the guidances that are currently being worked on and that are listed on CDER's 2017 guidance agenda. So these guidances are on the agenda and they're quality related. I'm not going to list all of them, but I'm just going to note a few of them. The first one is pre-submission facility correspondence. Obviously, that's related to the GDUFA 2 commitment that you've heard about. There is a forthcoming revised draft guidance on drug master files that covers types of DMFs, submission, and review procedures, and we'll have updated information. I also wanted to note harmonizing compendial standards with drug application CMC approval requirements with the USP pending monograph process. I'll touch on that towards the end of my presentation. As you can see, a number more. The only one I'm going to note on this slide is the use of the FDA in active ingredient software. So again, that relates to a GDUFA 2 requirement. But as you can see, there's a lot going on. So moving on to the last section of my presentation, best practices that can help reduce quality issues during ANDA reviews. The main concept I want to emphasize here is the importance of knowing your supplier and understanding your supply chain. So lack of communication with suppliers has led to delays in ANDA approvals. So these conversations should be taking place, and it shouldn't just be one-off kinds of communications. It should really be a relationship with suppliers throughout the product life cycle. So it's important for firms to identify and take steps to mitigate the weak points in their supply chain. So for example, for potential suppliers, a simple paper audit may not be sufficient to really understand the effectiveness of your supplier's quality system, and you may need to do a more careful audit, particularly if it's a critical supplier such as for API. Firms may also want to monitor and trend relevant metrics to understand the robustness of the operations from a supplier, and again, to understand the effectiveness of their quality system. And for sole source suppliers, more close communication and oversight may be warranted, and it may also be worth considering pursuing an alternative supplier as well. I'll have a few more examples in a minute, but the bottom line is that it's important to work with suppliers and contract manufacturers and labs before there's a problem inspection. Ultimately, firms' success is tied to their supplier success. So specifically in the DMF context, last-minute unsolicited DMF amendments can delay ANDA approvals, as we have to determine whether the new information that we're presented with influences our assessment. GDUFA 2 has a number of DMF program enhancements that could help on this issue, but at the end of the day, it's still a matter of applicants communicating with their suppliers. With respect to contract manufacturers and labs, lack of transparency regarding adverse inspection outcomes can lead to delays in ANDA approvals. And beyond that, if there's a lack of transparency, it can be difficult for applicants to know whether the issues that they're facing are ones that are easily addressed, or if they rise to the level of situations where an alternative manufacturer or lab should be pursued. And the last point I'm going to touch on is the importance of monitoring the USP as well as proposed revisions in the Pharmaceutical Forum. So for products that are covered by a monograph, the nomenclature must be the same as the monograph title, and the product must be able to meet monograph standards if they're tested. And what's also important to note is that new monographs may be introduced at any time, including when an ANDA is under review. So you don't want to be caught off guard by that. So if USP is proposing a monograph that your product would not meet, it's important to respond to the Pharmaceutical Forum. So to close, I just wanted to touch on the USP pending monographs guideline. So this facilitates a process for pending monographs in situations where there is an expected ANDA approval where the product would differ from an official USP monograph. And so the goal of it is to be able to have a monograph that's consistent with the FDA approval as soon as possible after that approval. So if the USP process only started essentially after the approval, that would lead to a discrepancy and a delay. So what the pending monographs guideline is aimed at is starting the USP process and publication of a notice of intent to revise before the FDA approval has been granted to get the ball rolling earlier. So the guideline itself is available at the URL on the slide. And as I mentioned, FDA will be providing guidance on this topic, which is listed in our agenda. And that concludes my presentation. Thanks for your time.